The Brazilian military government, also known in Brazil as the United States of Brazil or Fifth Brazilian Republic, was the authoritarian military dictatorship that ruled Brazil from 1 April 1964 to 15 March 1985. It began with the 1964 coup d'état led by the armed forces against the administration of President João Goulart, who, having been vice president, had assumed the office of president upon the resignation of the democratically elected president, Jânio Quadros, and ended when José Sani took office on 15 March 1985 as president. The military revolt was fomented by Miguel Reis Pinto, Adhemar de Barros, and Carlos Lacerda, then governors of the states of Minas Gerais, São Paulo, and Guanabara, respectively. The coup was planned and executed by the most forefront commanders of the Brazilian army and received the support of almost all high-ranking members of the military, along with conservative elements in society, like the Catholic Church and anti-communist civil movements among the Brazilian middle and upper classes. Internationally, it was supported by the State Department of the United States through its embassy in Brasilia. The military dictatorship lasted for almost 21 years. Despite initial pledges to the contrary, the military government, in 1967, enacted a new, restrictive constitution, and stifled freedom of speech and political opposition. The regime adopted nationalism, economic development, and anti-communism as its guidelines. The dictatorship reached the height of its popularity in the 1970s with the so-called Brazilian miracle, even as the regime censored all media and tortured and exiled dissidents. João Figueiredo became president in March 1979. In the same year he passed the amnesty law for political crimes committed for and against the regime, while combating the hardliners inside the government and supporting a re-democratization policy. Figueiredo could not control the crumbling economy, chronic inflation and concurrent fall of other military dictatorships in South America. Amid massive popular demonstrations in the streets of the main cities of the country, the first free elections in 20 years were held for the national legislature in 1982. In 1985, another election was held, this time to elect a new president, being contested between civilian candidates for the first time since the 1960s, being won by the opposition. In 1988, a new constitution was passed and Brazil officially returned to democracy. Since then, the military has remained under the control of civilian politicians, with no official role in domestic politics. Brazil's military government provided a model for other military regimes and dictatorships throughout Latin America, being systematized by the so-called doctrine of national security, which justified the military's actions as operating in the interest of national security in a time of crisis, creating an intellectual basis upon which other military regimes relied upon. In 2014, nearly 30 years after the regime collapsed, the Brazilian military recognized for the first time the excesses committed by its agents during the years of the dictatorship, including the torture and murder of political dissidents. In May 2018, the United States government released a memorandum, written by Henry Kissinger, dating back to April 1974, confirming that the leadership of the Brazilian military regime was fully aware of the killing of dissidents. It is estimated that 434 people were either confirmed killed or went missing. 8,000 indigenous people suffered a genocide and 20,000 people were tortured during the military dictatorship in Brazil. While some human rights activists and others assert that the true figure could be much higher, the armed forces have always disputed this. Brazil's political crisis stemmed from the way in which the political tensions had been controlled. In the 1930s and 1940s during the Vargas era, Vargas' dictatorship and the presidencies of his democratic successors marked different stages of Brazilian populism, an era of economic nationalism, state-guided modernization, and import substitution trade policies. Vargas' policies were intended to foster an autonomous capitalist development in Brazil by linking industrialization to nationalism, a formula based on a strategy of reconciling the conflicting interests of the middle class, foreign capital, the working class, and the landed oligarchy. Essentially, this was the epoch of the rise and fall of Brazilian populism from 1930 to 1964. Brazil witnessed, over the course of this time period, the change from export orientation of the first Brazilian republic to the import substitution of the populist era, and then to a moderate structuralism of 1964 to 80. Each of these structural changes forced a realignment in society and caused a period of political crisis. Period of right-wing military dictatorship marked the transition between populist era and the current period of democratization. The Brazilian